you push and push and push. I think, perfectionism, it's an interesting place to be as someone who sort of strives for that, because there are certainly, pros and cons to perfectionism. And I don't really know if you can sort of enjoy it on one sense without sort of going through the cons on the other side. When I look at it, again, I think it was always there. And I think as I then move through my education and then move through sport, it was just this sense of needing, sort of wanting to achieve more and needing things to be just right.
Welcome to the Get Invested podcast, where we share great conversations with experts from all walks of life to uncover their secret know-how and where they invest their time, their skills and their money, and the benefits that this has created. You see, the truth is that everyone invests. Every minute of every day, we're investing our time, our skills, our energy and our money in something. Some of us are investing consciously, some unconsciously, sometimes for good, sometimes for bad, and sometimes for no impact. Get Invested will help you to start living by design, not by default. I'm going to help you to make it happen, not let it happen. You'll hear the top tips on how you can live with conscious intent so that you can live more, work less, and leave a living legacy by investing now. Listen to the show to discover the top tips on how to get started, make the most of your investment journey, and ultimately to be living your dream, not someone else's. More episodes can be found on iTunes or at bushymartin.com.au/get invested. Thanks for listening, and now let's get invested. Hi, freedom fighters. Why do we have such a constant desire and need to do bigger, better, and faster? Where does this incessant need to push and push and push the boundaries come from? Why do we constantly seek perfection? And what is perfectionism anyway? And when do we cross the line from healthy striving to unhealthy perfectionism? This is a subject that constantly plagues me. Why do we constantly strive for perfection? Where does this drive come from? Why? Because the invisible gravitational pull of perfectionism is something that has dominated and plagued my life with a constant ebb and flowing mix of positive and negative impacts. And my conversation with today's special guest, who has already achieved much more than most of us will get close to in our entire lifetimes, has rubbed the scab off my perfectionist wounds. So I thought today I'd tackle our drive for perfection head on, to explore perfectionism fully in terms of its benefits as well as its downsides, to try and understand when our push for perfection serves us and when it doesn't. You see, I'm a bit of a self-proclaimed perfectionist. As Thomas Curran observes, how many times have you heard that one? It now appears to be everyone's favourite flaw, and it's often the common response to that difficult final question at a job interview: what's your biggest weakness? Well, of course, that's my perfectionism. You see, for something that supposedly holds us back, it's quite remarkable how many of us are quite happy and proud to say we're perfectionists. And it appears that our begrudging admiration for perfection has become so pervasive that we never really stop to question the concept of perfection. Just as an Olympic athlete strives to execute every move, hit every shot, catch every pass, or make every putt, just as a concert pianist strives to hit every note, just as a student taking an exam tries to get every answer correct. The thing is, nobody criticises athletes, musicians and entertainers for striving for perfection in performing their talents. In fact, we celebrate and greatly admire, and sometimes even idolise them. And nobody accuses them of having a disorder. So, what does it say about us in our current Western so-called advanced society that there's an underlying celebration of perfection? We tend to hold perfectionism up as a kind of insignia of worth, the emblem of the successful. But is this actually true? Well, my perfectionist tendencies have been with me for as long as I can remember, and I've never really been able to figure out why. Even though from the outside looking in, I may appear to have achieved a lot in my life and now enjoy a great lifestyle, I've always had this constant nagging voice in my head that what I do and what I've achieved is never really good enough. I need to keep pushing to do better and achieve more. Every time I achieve something or do better, I've got to raise the bar higher and do more in a never-ending escalation of self-expectation, which means I'm constantly working harder and longer and often on the edge of exhaustion and burnout. Now, these podcast introductions are a perfect case in point. The more I put into them and the better the feedback, the more I feel the need to put more effort into them in a never-ending cycle of self-induced pressure. So, why am I and many others unconsciously and instinctively driven to push the limits in a never-ending endeavour to strive for perfection? To always be focused on bigger, better, faster, even if the journey becomes all-consuming at the expense of all else, and the satisfaction of achieving the goal is fleeting and short-lived, like moths drawn to and engulfed in the flames. This reminds me of the poem by Don Marquis called The Lesson of the Moth, where the poet asks a moth why they fly into the flames. And the moth answers this way: "We get bored with the routine and crave beauty and excitement. Fire is beautiful, and we know that if we get too close, it will kill us. But what does that matter? It's better to be happy for a moment and be burned up with beauty than to live a long time and be bored all the while." That is what life is for. It's better to be part of beauty for one instant and then cease to exist than to live forever and never be part of beauty. This is the kamikaze fatal attraction of self-destructive extreme perfectionism, where we're drawn instinctively to the flame of achievement, only to burn out and burn up in the attempt. So what is perfection? Well, the dictionary defines perfection as a state at which someone or something, or maybe even some place, is free of all flaws or defects. And how does this flow on to perfectionism? Well, Dr. Keith Gaynor defines perfectionism as the setting up and striving for very demanding standards that are self-imposed and relentlessly pursued despite causing problems. It involves basing your self-worth almost exclusively on how well these high standards are met. Perfectionists tend to measure their self-worth almost exclusively on how we meet certain standards. Now, this results in your self-worth becoming very fragile, as it's not easy to meet or maintain such high artificial standards, as life inevitably throws something unexpected and uncontrollable in your way. And I think Elena Miller captures my concept of perfectionism brilliantly in her blog. So let me paraphrase it for you here. She says, "Perfectionism has been that perfect frenemy who's tagged along with me my entire life. On the surface, she's helped me to get stuff done right, but underneath, she was always there at the worst moments to whisper cruel criticisms in my ear, no matter how hard I worked or how well I'd done." Applying this two-sided perfectionist coin to my life, it's helped me to achieve high grades in high school, yes. It's helped me to grow from a punk-chested, sickly asthmatic runt at the age of 11 with zero athletic ability to captain coaching my uni hockey team to a record undefeated season win, and continue to play competitively for 49 years since, as I approach my 800th game. It's helped me to achieve first-class honours in architecture as a top graduate and go on to win many design awards. It's given me the courage and the resilience to change careers, and it's driven me to start and grow a series of successful businesses. In fact, perfectionism has helped me enjoy a level of success at pretty much anything and everything I put my mind to. But at the same time, perfectionism has also been there to tell me that each of my accomplishments, can't even get that right, wasn't sufficient. That I should try harder to do more, to be better. Every time I've achieved something difficult, my perfectionist voice was whispering in my ear that this wasn't good enough and I need to set my sights higher. A self-destructive cycle of endless self-criticism and endemic dissatisfaction. Perfectionism exists in the silent way that I used to berate myself for not being able to do certain things. It's this insidious belief that I used to entertain that all will be perfect and fine if only I can be perfect and fine. So I used to procrastinate or over-prepare or over-plan or overthink conversations before and after I had them. I used to mentally beat myself up if I said or did something that didn't go perfectly to plan. But here's the perfectionist paradox, because I can honestly say that I wouldn't have achieved what I have achieved in life if it wasn't for my perfectionism drive. But it's come at a great cost. Where others are out enjoying life, I've spent most of mine working, and I've sacrificed a lot of life's experiences in a constant endeavour to make my mark. So, while something that at first seems positive and that we all strive for, it ultimately has the opposite effect when taken to the extreme, as we attack ourselves and our sense of who we are and how we feel and our sense of self-worth. So sometimes when we strive for something excessively in the pursuit of perfection, we actually end up hurting ourselves. We over-worry and suffer low moods. Physically we feel overtired. We have poor sleep. We end up ruminating in our minds by going over and over things in what I call stinking thinking, as we catastrophise by making things seem much bigger and much more daunting than they need to be. So why are we caught in this endless pursuit of perfection? Well, according to some, it's all about life and death. You see, my dogs don't appear to be contemplating their purpose in life, and they seem relatively well adjusted as they live entirely in the moment, unburdened by mistakes of the past or anxious about the future. So why then do humans constantly pursue perfection and push the limits? Perhaps it's a desire to perceive our lives as meaningful. According to social psychologist Dr. Clay Routledge, his explanation is that has received a significant amount of scientific attention that relates to the human awareness of self and death. According to terror management theory, humans are like all other animals in that we strive to survive. Our bodies consist of systems that work to keep us alive. And as conscious beings, we deliberately engage in efforts to avoid death. We're motivated to live. However, unlike other animals, humans are intelligent enough to realise that death is certain. That is, we're uniquely aware of our mortal nature. We understand that despite our best efforts to stay alive, death is inevitable. So in this regard, terror management theory asserts that this juxtaposition of a desire to live and an awareness of death has the potential to cause a significant amount of anxiety or terror, and that humans need to manage this terror in some way. We would not be a very productive species if we lived our lives in constant fear of death. Thus, according to the theory, we seek out a sense of enduring meaning that makes us feel more than mortal. In other words, we know our lives are brief, and so we endeavour to be part of something that transcends biological existence. This sense of death transcendence can come from having children, creating works that will leave a lasting legacy, investing in a group or organisation that outlasts the lives of any individual member, and so on. So in short, heightening the awareness of death heightens our efforts to pursue perfection and break boundaries to find and preserve transcendent meaning. According to Dr. Routledge, a large body of research demonstrates that the realisation that life is finite is a potent driving force for our individual and collective efforts to strive for perfection in order to feel that our lives are purposeful and meaningful. We all want to be more than mere mortal beings who die and disappear forever without a trace. To feel meaningful by pushing the limits is to feel like we've made a lasting mark, a contribution that will endure beyond our deaths. So to pursue perfection is to feel meaningful, which helps us feel immortal. In addition, I wonder if there are others like myself who operate on the basis that when someone says that something can't be done or is forbidden, it makes us want to do it more as a challenge to be overcome by attaining perfection. To me, I wonder if we strive for perfection because we know that it's impossible to completely achieve it. We unconsciously think that that it'll feel better or more accomplished if we do fulfill a so-called impossible goal. So perhaps we do things that aren't attainable because they're just that. They aren't attainable. Our sole reasoning for perfection might differ because of our circumstances or our individual personalities, but in the long run, we simply strive for perfection because we want to be the best that we can be to enjoy the satisfaction that goes with it, together with the immediate recognition and the lasting legacy that this level of achievement endows. And another one of the reasons that I'm focusing on our push for perfectionism today is that its occurrence appears to be becoming widespread and increasing at a rapid rate. Again, social psychologist Thomas Curran has observed that the incidence of perfectionism is rising as society is changing and our sense of personal identity is changing with it, causing differences in the way we interact with each other and the world at large. Our Western liberal capitalist market-based society promotes individualism with unrestricted choice and total personal freedom, characteristics that Curran believes are fostering the epidemic levels of the perfectionist problem. And he gives some good examples. A repetitive survey of Olympic athletes across the world revealed that over 50% of them would rather win a gold medal even if it came at the cost of their lives within 5 years. Now, this is extreme perfectionism in action. And this reminds me of the myth of the thorn bird. There's a legend about a bird which sings just once in its life, more sweetly than any other creature on the face of the earth. From the moment it leaves the nest, it searches for a thorn tree and doesn't rest until it's found one. Then, singing among the savage branches, it impales itself upon the longest, sharpest spine. And, dying, it rises above its own agony to outcarol the lark and the nightingale. One superlative song, its own existence, the price. But when it sings, the whole world stills to listen, and God in his heaven smiles. For the best is only brought at the cost of great pain. Now, many of us today, and particularly the young, are preoccupied with the attainment of their perfect life and lifestyle. In terms of image, status and wealth, data shows that people born in the US in the late 1980s are 20% more likely than their parents and grandparents to report material richness as their most important life goal. Curran also confirms that young people also borrow much more heavily than prior generations, and they spend a greater proportion of their income on image goods and status possessions. And these possessions are perceived perfect lifestyles are increasingly on display in vivid detail on all our all-pervasive, always-on social media platforms like Insta, Facebook, Snapchat and TikTok, etc. In this new visual culture, the appearance of perfection appears to be far more important than the reality, and it seems to be a self-perpetuating and self-reinforcing cycle. And as we blindly chase this mirage of the perfectible life and lifestyle, we're convinced that the only way to achieve it is by working harder and harder. At the heart of the notion of the Australian dream, which has grown out of the American dream, is a belief that nothing is out of reach if we want it badly enough. Opportunity, meritocracy, the self-made person, and underlying it all, hard work. The notion that hard work always pays off is certainly a driving concept that I've personally embraced for most of my life. The idea that we're captains of our own destiny. And these ideas connect our pursuit of wealth, status and our image with our innate personal value. And this is where the extreme perfectionist danger kicks in. Because this incessant drive for bigger, better and faster has created an intricate system of measuring sticks that starts at school, where metrics, rankings and league tables have emerged as the yardsticks for which merit can be quantified and used to grade people into schools, classes and universities as tools to improve standards and performance. And this all starts young, as the pursuit of perfection becomes ingrained in our psyches. As evidence of this, according to Curran, young people in American high schools take about 112 mandatory standardised tests between pre-kindergarten and the end of year 12. So it's no wonder that most of us report a strong need to strive, perform and achieve as central to our modern life. We've been conditioned to define ourselves in the strict and narrow terms of grades, percentiles and league tables. Constant comparison and resulting judgment and criticism are the natural outflows of this approach. And this is the perfect breeding ground for perfectionism, where constant striving and measurement preys on our insecurities about how we're performing and how we appear to other people. An environment that actually amplifies our imperfections, where every flaw or unforeseen setback increases our need to perform more perfectly next time, or else we're considered a failure. That constant underlying pervasive feeling that we're flawed and deficient. We're under constant pressure to always be doing better. And this is where those of us who harbour inherent perfectionist tendencies get ourselves into trouble. Because despite popular belief, striving perfection isn't about perfecting things. It's not about striving for excellence. If we're really honest, it's about perfecting ourselves, or more precisely, perfecting our imperfect self. Now, in my case, right from a very early age when I was bedridden with asthma and spent most of my days drawing and designing things for years on end, my role model was Leonardo da Vinci and his concept of the universal man, a Renaissance concept of an individual respected for advanced skills across all fields of knowledge, where a man can do all things if he will, as Alberti said at the time. At that formative age, I fully embraced the ideal embodied in the basic tenets of Renaissance humanism, which considered humans to be at the centre of the universe, limitless in our capacities for development, and led to the notion that we should try to embrace all knowledge and develop our capacities as full as possible. In other words, the belief that you can be perfect at everything if you just set your mind to it and work hard enough to achieve it. This ideal led me to think about life like a mountain of achievement that my pursuit of perfection imagined myself scaling continuously. I kept telling myself that once I've reached the summit, then others will no longer see me as flawed and I'll finally be worth something. But here's the rub. This flawed perfectionist approach forgets to tell us that once we've reached our mythical summit, we're then dragged down again by our insecurity and shame, and we start scaling the peak again, creating a never-ending cycle of self-defeat. In the pursuit of unattainable perfection, we can't just step off the mountain, which is why my habitual perfectionism has been so difficult to overcome. Every time I used to get knocked down from the mountaintop, I could see no other option but to try scaling that unattainable peak again. And interestingly, as I describe in my book, The Freedom Formula, the ancient Greeks knew that this endless struggle up and down the same mountain is not the road to happiness. Their image of hell was a bad king called Sisyphus, who was doomed for eternity to keep rolling a massive boulder up the mountain, only to see it roll back down again and have to start again. So, if we're going to consider the positive and negative impacts of perfectionism, it's important to start with a definition of what perfectionism actually is. And according to the dictionary, perfectionism is a disposition to regard anything short of perfection as unacceptable. In applying this approach, there are some cases when this may be a problem and others when it may not be a problem. In fact, perfectionism may help people achieve a high level of success. For example, the tennis player Serena Williams attributes her success to being a perfectionist, and she sees it as a good thing. So perfectionism isn't necessarily a problem, but it can be a problem depending on its extent and its impacts. Another definition by psychiatrist David Burns is that a perfectionist is someone whose standards are high beyond reach or reason and who strains compulsively and unremittingly toward impossible goals and who measures their own worth entirely in terms of productivity and accomplishment. So under this much tighter definition, perfectionism is a problem, as the person suffering from it is measuring their entire self-worth in terms of whether they meet and or maintain their unattainable standards. Now, in my experience, I see perfectionism as being on a spectrum. It's not a binary state where you either have it or you don't, and it's not a fixed permanent condition. Levels of perfectionism can vary with the situation, the circumstance, and the individual. So it's largely a self-perception. So, according to Martin Anthony, who wrote the book When Perfect Isn't Good Enough, the key questions you need to ask yourself if you feel you have perfectionist tendencies is whether your perfectionism is a problem, and if it is, in what areas is your perfectionism a problem? Then explore these flow-on questions. Are your standards higher than others around you? Are you able to meet your standards? Do you get upset if you don't meet your standards or if others don't meet them? Do your standards help you achieve your goals or do they get in the way? What would be the costs and benefits of changing your standards? I believe that a level of perfectionism can be helpful, but once it extends beyond a certain extreme level, then it creates more problems than it solves and detracts from other important but neglected areas of your life, like your relationships, relaxation, and leisure. So where are you on the perfectionist spectrum? If you're on the extreme end of the perfectionist spectrum, what can you do to improve things? Well, again, according to Martin Anthony, you can work on altering your thinking and altering your behaviour. In terms of your thinking, many extreme perfectionists suffer from all or nothing thinking, a tendency to see things in black or white, or a tendency to see things as either right or wrong. For example, an extreme perfectionist is likely to think that if you've eaten a cookie, you might as well eat the whole packet as you've blown your diet. There's nothing in between. And according to Anthony, with extreme perfectionists, there's nothing in between. You must always do things a certain way. You should always do things in a certain way. Your language is dominated by should statements and must statements. This is what psychologist Albert Ellis quite humorously describes as shoulding on yourself or masturbation. Quite like that one. So if this incessant pursuit of perfection is ingrained in many of our psyches, is perfectionism a good thing or a bad thing? Well, according to an article by Jessica Stillman, some professionals argue that yes, perfectionism is a good thing in holding and attaining high standards, while others say it's a bad thing, as perfectionism can lead to a paralysing fear of failure, which is not good for your productivity or your mental health. So who's right? Well, new research offers a very surprising answer. Maybe both are right. Analysis of perfectionism studies by Professor Andrew Hill reveals there are two types of perfectionism, one good and one very bad. The difference between the two comes down to whether a perfectionist's standards for him or herself are just high or impossibly high. If you're setting yourself up for continual failure by setting the bar so high that no human could ever really achieve it, then that amounts to the wrong kind of perfectionism. Bad perfectionism is when people constantly worry about making mistakes, letting others down, or not measuring up to their own impossibly high standards. The consequences of this incessant sense of failure and worry are quite grim. Being this sort of perfectionist can contribute to serious health problems including depression, anxiety, eating disorders, fatigue, and even early mortality. Or in other words, you can stress yourself into an early grave. And besides premature death, it also causes burnout, which is exactly what happened to me in my early 30s when my selfishly focused, all-consuming perfectionism cost me everything that was important to me. Keeping my perfectionist tendencies at bay has been my greatest challenge ever since. Now, Brené Brown captures extreme perfectionism when she said to Oprah that when perfectionism is driving, shame is always riding shotgun and fear is the annoying backseat driver. When perfectionism is driving, shame is always riding shotgun and fear is the annoying backseat driver. And she goes on to say that perfectionism is a way of thinking that says this: if I look perfect, live perfect, and work perfect, then I can avoid or minimise criticism, blame and ridicule. In this way, she sees perfectionism as a 20-ton shield that we carry around, hoping that it will keep us from being hurt, when in truth, what it does is keep us from being who we really are and who we want to be. This is where Brené draws a clear distinction from being a healthy striver for excellence versus an unhealthy extreme perfectionist. And the major difference between the two revolves around what she calls a worthiness crunch, where healthy striving is internally focused, where you want to be the best you can be, versus unhealthy perfectionism, where your external orientation means that you're more worried about what others think about you. So, while this sort of bad perfectionism seems downright scary, there's another type of perfectionism that isn't bad at all. If instead of constantly failing to meet your own expectations and perpetually fretting about it, you merely insist on giving your best, then there's nothing to worry about, according to Hill. In fact, it's probably a professional positive. This aspect of perfectionism involves the setting of high personal standards and working towards these goals in a proactive manner. These efforts may help maintain a sense of accomplishment and delay the debilitating efforts of burnout, the study found. So, if you suspect you have perfectionist tendencies, it might be time for some serious soul searching. If, upon reflection, you recognise yourself more in the description of good perfectionism, just carry on doing what you're doing. But if, on the other hand, you have to admit that the bad perfectionism sounds more familiar, research strongly suggests you should think about getting your impossible-to-please tendencies under control. So which are you? The good type or the bad? And what percentage perfectionist are you? Well, I did a quick quiz on BuzzFeed.com/Perpetua/what percentage perfectionist are you? Of course, there's a website for everything now. And it revealed that I'm now currently at 40% perfectionist. But prior to my early midlife crisis, I was over 80%. So do yourself a favour and do the quiz to find out where you lie on the perfectionist spectrum so that you can then learn how to better manage it if you're at the extreme end. And it asks you some great questions like, do you feel like there's a correct way to do everything? Do you stick to a recipe exactly when you're cooking? Would it bother you if you went out in public not dressed well? Do you go out of your way to correct errors you make? Do you correct other people all the time in conversation? Do you find it hard to finish projects? Do small mistakes that you've made haunt you for a long time? Do you have a general all-or-nothing approach to life? Do you give up on strict self-imposed rules if you break them even just once? Do you take negative feedback very badly and interpret as a harsh judgment of your entire being? Do you often beat yourself up over mistakes from your past, like many years later? Do you define yourself by your accomplishments? Do you find it hard to feel good about things that you do unless they are validated by other people's praise? When other people do praise you, do you sometimes write it off as them not noticing all the things that you actually did wrong? Do you worry about being mediocre and ordinary? Do you take pride in working more than other people? Do you procrastinate a lot? Do you avoid situations and activities where you may be awkward or unskilled? Have you ever had a quarter-life or midlife crisis like myself? And do you find it hard to accept your successes because there's some greater success that you've yet to achieve? As long as we keep convincing ourselves that there's nothing more real or meaningful in our lives than this hopeless quest for perfectionism, then we're going to condemn ourselves and future generations to this continuing futility and despair. So we need to ask ourselves some big questions. Is our society's heavy emphasis on competition, comparison, evaluation and testing really benefiting us? Unfortunately, I keep hearing many public figures condemning people by saying that all we need to do is buck up, grow some ghoulies and show more resilience in the face of the relentless, unprecedented pressures of escalating change. But this approach is washing our hands of our collective responsibility to create an accepting, supporting society and a caring culture where doing our best supersedes having to be the best. And the associated big question is, when are we going to appreciate that there's something fundamentally inhuman about limitless perfection? because none of us are flawless. We need to constantly remind ourselves that to escape the downside traps of extreme perfectionism, we need to teach ourselves that in a constantly changing, chaotic world, that life will often defeat us and that this is actually okay. Failure is not a weakness, but merely a learning opportunity. If we want to help ourselves to outgrow our self-defeating snare of impossible perfection, we need to celebrate the joys and the beauties of imperfection as a normal and natural part of everyday living and loving. And this is perfectly captured in John Legend's ballad, All of Me, where he laments, "'Cause all of me loves all of you. Love your curves and all your edges, all your perfect imperfections." But let's make sure that we don't throw the achievement baby out with the extreme perfectionist bathwater, because we can't ignore our inherent and inescapable need and desire to pursue perfection in order to give our lives meaning, in order to cheat death by leaving a lasting legacy. So how do you achieve this? While dealing with extreme perfectionism, we also need to deal with the opposite end of the scale of the growing culture where nobody fails and nobody is told that they will fail, because nobody, under those terms, will reach their potential with this approach. As John Bowers so well says, failure and loss are critical for success. It's the acceptance of failure that's not. Michelangelo is credited with saying that the greatest danger for most of us is not that our aim is too high and that we miss it, but that we aim too low and we reach it. We need to reframe failure as a motivating force, not an excuse to give up. So perhaps we need to reframe perfectionism not as a destructive intolerance for failure, but rather we redefine perfectionism as a willingness to do what is difficult and to achieve what is right, to pursue the healthy striving of excellence. In this light, we can embrace failure as a good thing in our quest for perfection. And when we start seeking perfection without fear of failure, there's no limit to what we can accomplish. So, as a recovering perfectionist, this is where I'm going to end my mental meanderings on the subject. And I'll be honest, I feel that this introduction is imperfect. There's a lot more I want to explore and say on this topic. There's a lot more research I came across when I was going down endless rabbit holes on the topic of perfectionism, and I want to cover them all, but I'm going to leave it here. Is it perfect? No. But hopefully, I've got you thinking about the subject in a way that you can explore and question whether you're a healthy striver or an extreme paralysed perfectionist. And a great example of a healthy striver for excellence is today's special guest, Zoe Lynam. Zoe is one of those few high-energy, high achievers that you meet that instantly inspires and motivates you to do great things, just as she's done and she continues to do. As you'll hear in our great discussion today, for as long as she can remember, Zoe has been driven to succeed by an intrinsic motivation that overpowers any external motivating factors. And as you'll hear, her achievements have been considerable and many over the years, from making the under-21s Australian Netball team to making the Australian Olympic rowing team just 4 years after taking up the sport, despite suffering a number of major injuries on the cusp of major events. Now, to put this in context, rowing is recognised as one of the hardest sports in existence and ranked in the top 10 most physically demanding sports in the world. It requires a combination of strength and power coupled with exhaustive levels of cardiovascular endurance that challenges the extremes of physical and mental toughness of the competitors. It requires an entire body workout, exercising a multitude of muscles and resulting in lactic acid buildup from head to toe that lasts for days after training. So rowing's a punishing physical and mental workout. And to be a successful rower, there are two vital mental qualities. The first is willpower, that's driven by the mantra, can I hurt myself more than you can hurt you? So in this context, it's very common for people to collapse in rowing because they're racing themselves to destruction. It's a sport, in short, for masochists. You've got to enjoy pain. And alongside willpower, the other crucial quality is concentration. So to be a good rower, you need a very competitive mind. If you don't have the right state of mind to focus and fight through or block out the pain, it's unlikely you'll be any good at rowing, no matter how technically good that you actually become. And as Olympic legend rower Matthew Pinsett once said, when you're rowing, your senses are not in control anymore and they start to leave you. The hearing will go, the vision goes out of sync, there isn't much left. Your body starts to close down anything it doesn't need at that moment. It prioritises to the parts of the body that are in trouble, like your muscles suffering the agony of the row. And despite this grueling, all-consuming athletic endeavour, Zoe has successfully studied to become a lawyer and is about to become the CEO of a professional services firm. Zoe's commitment and endurance are awe-inspiring, along with her ability to overcome adversity by investing in things that she really cares about. And like me, Zoe has an awesome supportive partner who brings balance and irons out the perfectionist tendency kinks. So if you want to embrace and be inspired with all of the benefits of healthy striving and push your limits to achieve more than you could ever have imagined while still maintaining balance and perspective, then enjoy this great, motivating conversation with Zoe Lynam. Hi, freedom fighters. Now, as I've often said before, peak performance in professional sport is often a microcosm of success in everyday life. But nowhere is this put more to the test than the Olympics, where superhuman levels of determination, discipline and endurability, combined with endless years of blood, sweat and tears, are required just to compete, let alone win. So to deep dive into what it takes and what are the true costs and sacrifices both before, during and after competing in world-class sports and its flow-on effects with everything beyond that, we're joined by an athlete who successfully navigated this perilous path, Zoe Lynam. So welcome, and let's get invested, Zoe.
Thanks, Bushy. Really happy to be with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been looking forward to catching up for a while because you've had an amazing journey. And I guess for those that are involved in elite sport, they'd know you well, but there'll be a lot that haven't heard of Zoe Lynam. So can you start by telling us who you are, what you do, and most importantly, Zoe, why you do what you do?
Yeah, happy to, Bushy. So thank you. I think a few people would know me. Probably would know me under the name of Zoe Uphill though, rather than Zoe Lynam. With Zoe Uphill being my maiden name and the name that I obviously used when I was an athlete. But look, I think who I am. I think first and foremost, I'm now a mum of two very gorgeous children. I'm a wife of a wonderful partner. I'm a lawyer. Former Olympic athlete. I was obviously competed at the Beijing Olympics, but before joining the world of rowing, I was an elite netballer. So we can have a chat about that and the transition between those two sports. But I'm now the CEO of a professional services firm headquartered in Canberra, but we're sort of based across the eastern seaboard with teams in Sydney, Brisbane, Adelaide, and Melbourne.
That sounds like an extremely busy life right up until this point, Zoe, right there. So I'm going to love to dive into that. So I'd love you to take us back through your journey so far, if you don't mind, and go back as far as you'd like to talk through where you've invested your time, your energy and money, why you've done that, what you've learned from it, and how has that brought you to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. I think, going back, I was a kid that grew up in the town of Kiama, which some of your listeners might know. Back then in the early 80s, Kiama was very much a country town. I think it's a little bit different now. It's a couple of hours south of Sydney, but certainly back then, diesel trains and not a lot of access to the bigger cities. So certainly grew up as a country kid on the coast. I think for me, when I look back on those early years, I think I remember that I was intensely competitive from a very, very young age, but only in relation to sport. I think it's I'm certainly, driven to succeed in every area of my life, but the competitiveness was fairly extreme when it came to sporting events. And
what? Let's delve into why. Where did that emerge? Can you think back to the time that you first thought that, yes, I'm out here to win?
Yeah, well, actually, it's a very interesting story. My husband often reminds me that every time I drive past this particular park in Kiama that I can't help but tell this story. But I was 6 years old. I was in year one. And we had a cross country at my local primary school, and it was a lap around the oval. It was a lap around a park actually, and the park had a rotunda and it had a slide and a swing set. And I was told as a 6-year-old to make sure I ran around the slide. Now, as an adult, you'd think, oh, well, that's just making sure you run around the outside of the slide. But when someone said to me as a 6-year-old, you need to run around the slide, I did exactly that. So I did the full lap, and the slide was right at the end, and I ran around the bottom of this slippery slide, and I came fourth, but I was winning. So what happened was I went round, and they saw me go round, and they said, no, just keep going. But I'd already gone halfway around. So then the people behind me beat me, and I'll never forget it. And I said to myself when I was a 6-year-old, that's it. There's no way that I'm ever losing a cross country race again. And I didn't. From year 2 to year 12, I won every cross country race I went in. So I think that's my sort of recollection of where that started. I don't sort of know where it came from, but I knew that I did not like to be beaten. And that was the start of a journey that would last another 22, 23 years.
Yeah, there's a single-minded determination that I'm hearing there. Where else did that evidence in itself in those early days, Zoe?
Yeah, I think too. I was that kid who was told by my parents, you need to make sure you eat your dinner and eat your vegetables and that sort of thing, or you can just, stay at the table. So I would say, okay, I'll just stay at the table. And I was the child who fell asleep, at the dining table because I was determined to not eat vegetables. So there was this theme coming out that was certainly challenging for my parents, and I know that my father certainly recalled many of those instances to my husband when they first met and said, "Oh, not sure what you've got yourself in for here." But I think in those early years it was really around being certainly competitive in one sense, but sheer determination in another. And I think too for me, Bushy, there was also an element of fairness that I was really focused on when I was young. I think if I sort of moved to netball, I started playing netball at a certain club when I was quite young, and just did not, even as a really young person, didn't see that things were being done in a fair way, particularly at that age when no one's really that good at the game of netball, and everyone just needs to be given a go. And I noticed that from an early age. And so I said to my parents, I don't want to play with this group anymore, and I switched clubs. So I think there were sort of key moments in my life that led to where I am now. But even as a very young person, I had that sheer determination, but also a really strong sense of fairness and what was right and wrong.
Yeah, let's delve into that fairness piece for a minute. Is that something that you that came from what you picked up from mum and dad, or is it just an innate sense that's I can see where that fairness would take you into the law actually in that context.
Yeah.
Can you have you thought through that at all? What's your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it was more innate. I think when we talk about, nature versus nurture side of things, I don't sort of recall any particular instances from my folks when, I was younger where that was a real focus. And I think, I think it's more intrinsic. And I think for me, just as a person, intrinsic motivation has always been the driving factor for me. It's always been something that has sat with me, and I'm my own worst enemy. I'm certainly my own worst self-critic, and I do things purely for the joy, but also because I just feel that need internally. And I think the same thing with the fairness side of things. I think that, I always viewed sort of, equality and a fair go as a really important parts of life, even when I was really young. And like you said, I think that was probably one of the reasons that I did move towards the law. But I haven't really thought critically about it. But I think reflecting on it now, it's probably more of an innate feeling than anything else.
I guess I was laughing earlier because the similarities between your early journey and mine are quite similar. And I remember sitting at the breakfast table until lunchtime over porridge. I just couldn't do porridge. Never have, never will. It's like ready mixed concrete to me. And same drill. You eat what's on the plate, or you don't leave the table until you do. And
that's right.
I literally sat there for hours, determined that I'm not eating this stuff. And so very, very similar there. And I guess part of the exercise that I'd like to explore a little bit, because what I'd see linking the fairness through to the single-minded determination that you have to compete in the sports arena is there's an element of almost perfectionism that comes down to sometimes a black and white view of life. It's you can see right and you can see wrong, and when you see wrong, it's like, well, we need to sort this out. Was there an element of perfectionism that either was there intrinsically or emerged, and that was perhaps reinforced over the journey, both in terms of elite sport and your career in law, that has influenced the way you look at the world?
I think so. Yeah, I think perfectionism. It's an interesting place to be as someone who sort of strives for that, because there are certainly pros and cons to perfectionism, and I don't really know if you can sort of enjoy it on one sense without sort of going through the cons on the other side. And I think when I look at it again, I think it was always there. And I think as I then move through my education and then move through sport, it was just this sense of needing, sort of wanting to achieve more and needing things to be just right. And I never forget, I was playing netball for New South Wales at national championships as a 19-year-old, I think. And we just played a game and I played the whole game and we'd won, and I came off the court and I was in tears. And it was quite confronting, I think, for the people who sat on the bench who didn't actually get to play the game, who sort of said, why are you so upset? And we just won, and I said, just because it didn't feel quite right. I got some things wrong, and even though the result was there, it was that feeling of not quite being satisfied with that performance. And I think that that drives me, that feeling of sort of constantly chasing that little bit more satisfaction. And I do understand that with that comes stress, and that there are as I said, cons to that, but it was that drive to always be that little bit better. And that certainly came out in sport. It certainly came out in my education, and now even in my work. Certainly, it's always sort of striving to make sure that I am the best that I can absolutely be, and what are the areas that I might not be 100% in, and how can I improve those? And certainly not at the detriment of running with things that I'm good at, but certainly trying to make sure that I can get across as much as I can and achieve in all the areas that I'm focused on.
So right from the get-go, were you a person that would whip yourself for you get 99% right and that 1% wasn't quite right? You'd be more focused on whipping yourself over the 1% than congratulating yourself on the 99. Is that you?
Absolutely. That is me to a T. Yep.
Yeah, that's I'm laughing again because that's the challenge I've had all my life, actually. And I often try to question myself, where did that come from? I can't really put a finger on it because I didn't see it in mum and dad. But I've had this just internal drive that I just want to really, whatever I turn my hand to, it's either 150% or I don't do it. I won't do half a job. I'll go full bore and beyond bore. But if I can't do that, then I won't do anything. Are you similar in that regard?
Yeah. I think it's all or nothing, isn't it? It's once you're in, you're in. And I think, and sometimes, and I think that I'm slowly learning this, and I think through my husband who's a wonderful support person, but also sort of chides me sometimes and says, why are you doing that? And I said, well, I've committed to it now, so. So I'm in, and when I'm in, I'm all in. And I've had that experience, and it hasn't always been positive. I think sometimes when we get involved with, I've been, on boards, and some of those boards have been wonderful, but some of them haven't been. And I think you sort of get to a point where someone says to you, well, you can just step down. And I said, well, no. I committed to 2 or 3 years, and I will see that through, because that's what I've committed to, and I want to try and make a difference, and even if it's at the detriment sometimes of other areas of my life.
And boards are a great case, because they're often very politically motivated, and there's people on there for the glory, not for the work. And
that's right.
And I've sort of consciously made a decision in recent years to not get involved in boards, because that whole committee thinking just doesn't work. There's a lot of bollocks talked and no real action or outcomes, and your sense of fairness and your sense of commitment certainly wouldn't be matched by a lot there. And in fact, quite a few would be threatened by that, I'd imagine. So that's probably been an interesting challenge for you, has it?
It has, and I think too, the boards that I've sat on, mostly related to sport and some community organisations. I think you also, being someone who comes to it though, when I relocated to Canberra is when I got involved with boards, but I didn't grow up in Canberra, so I got involved with these boards, but I didn't know the local landscape and the local politics around these boards, and that's a really interesting place to be as someone who wants to make a difference, but because I didn't understand the landscape and understand the players involved, I missed the nuance in lots of those conversations, and I would sort of bring more of a business mind and a legal mind to those particular board meetings and AGMs, but you then realise that perhaps people aren't in it for the same reasons, and that's hard to come to terms with as well.
Totally, love it. Well, I'm going to circle back a little bit, because I'd like to go on the dual netball come law journey if we can, because again, tell us a story around your entry into netball, and again, quite an escalated and fairly quick trajectory as a great netballer, and then in alignment with that, how the law exercise came about. Can you talk us through your thinking and how that panned out?
Yeah, I mean, as a kid, I was when you grew up in a country town, sort of netball or hockey for the girls, and I was in a rugby league for the boys, and that's how I discovered netball fairly early on. And I was a kid who did lots of sports. I did athletics and swimming and netball and running, but always had a really keen interest in netball and a love for it too. So that was something that when I got a little bit older, when I started high school, my parents said you can't keep doing everything, so you need to choose. And I really did have a choice between netball or basketball. I've sort of played reps in both of those and decided to go down the netball path. And yeah, I think, as I became a teenager, I'm a fairly tall person now. I'm sort of 6'1", but back then I didn't grow till I was much older. So I was a sort of average height kid who played in the centre court of netball, and I was quick, and I think that certainly helped, and made my way to the Illawarra Academy of Sport when I was 14 and spent a couple of years there, and then made New South Wales Catholic schoolgirl teams. I was at the Catholic school for high school, so made those teams. But then interestingly, I trialled for the New South Wales under-17s team 2 years in a row and wasn't selected. And I thought, well, that's it really. That's me done. I didn't make it either year. I was getting towards the end of my schooling. I had a really keen focus on on my HSC at the time, and I sort of said, well, it's not going to happen. Anyway, my Illawarra Academy coach, who happened to also be involved at high levels in New South Wales, said to me, I think you really need to trial again for the under-19s team. And I said, why? I've been putting myself through this misery for 2 years. And at the time I was with the New South Wales Institute of Sport as a netball scholarship holder, but they had quite a few people, more than would make a team of 12 on those scholarships. So I said to her, okay, I'll give it one more year. And I put my nomination form in for the under-19s New South Wales team, and I made it for that year. And that's then how the netball journey really took off with that team and the Institute of Sport. I was with them for 3 years. The New South Wales Institute of Sport was with on scholarship there for 3 years, and then moved down to the Australian Institute of Sport on the scholarship when I was in my second year of university, and transitioned down to Canberra. And I think back then, very different to today, the AIS was the pinnacle of sport. This is this is around 2001.
Yeah.
And it was the absolute pinnacle. Everybody lived there. Everybody went there. So as one of 14 people in the country who was lucky enough to get a scholarship down there, it was a sensational sort of launching platform for me. And the same year, I was named in the Sydney University Sandpipers netball team, which in today's sort of competition is the Suncourt Super Netball. So back then it was the ANZ Championship, and there were two Sydney teams, the Sydney Swifts and Sydney Sandpipers, and I played for the Sandpipers that year too, and made the Australian under-21 team as well. So that it was a sort of a big couple of years there as I sort of journeyed from high school into university and sort of the higher levels of netball. But also going back to when I was a teenager, still studying at school and doing a lot of travelling. My dad in particular sacrificed so much to give me an opportunity to excel, and living in Kiama and training in Auburn in Sydney, sort of a 2-hour drive each way. And, before I was old enough to drive, he would be driving me to and from 3-4 times a week. And then once I got my license, it wasn't too bad. But certainly, the sort of the sacrifice there, but also what that led to was some very late nights and not a lot of sleep, and sort of as a teenager, that's not the best position you want to be in. But I think just the sheer determination that I had around the sport, but then also the study was a really keen focus for me. I was always had an interest in law, and knew that to get into law, I needed to hit the high 90s in my HSC, and it was something I was absolutely focused on. And I'll never forget, actually, I was studying for my HSC, and my brother, who's 2 years older than me, he was doing accounting at university, and we used to have competitions of who could study more, which is a little bit sad, isn't it? But it's like, I studied for 6 hours. How long did you do? But tell me,
jumping in there, because I'd be very revealing, I think, because I'd love you to talk through what did your routine look like when you were, because to get to that level in netball and also to get into law. I'll share with you off air that when I was at uni, the only two people that were burning the midnight as much as myself at doing architecture was I was in a boarding house and at uni, and the guy doing law was doing just as many hours as I was. I survived the 2 last years of uni on 4 hours sleep a night, and that was my only way to get through. But and on top of that, you're playing elite level sport, which would demand, I would have thought, hours a day at times, if not more. Can you talk us through the routine and how you're able to juggle the demands of sport and the enormous reading load and case study load and doing law at the same time? How did you make that work?
Yeah, it's a funny question, Bushy, because I think if I look back now, I asked the same question. And I think, yeah, one being a lot younger is obviously a benefit. I certainly couldn't do it today, but I think I was just so unbelievably structured, very organised. Back when I was at uni, everything was face to face, so there wasn't a lot that was done online. So it was a very full workload. I did 6 subjects a semester because I did a combined commerce and law degree. So I did 3 law, 3 commerce, and it was a big workload. But I tried to structure it as well as I could, and be as organised as I could. And I think in my uni days, I could obviously drive then, so I would structure it so I'd leave my house in the morning and spend most of the day at uni and in the library, and then I would and that was in Wollongong, and then Wollongong to Sydney was a little bit shorter distance than say Kiama to Sydney, so it was a good sort of stop off point in the middle of the day, and then I would sort of head off to training and obviously then come all the way back to Kiama in the evening. But I think that just being organised and being really efficient. I mean, they say, give a busy person something to do and they'll get it done. And I think that certainly resonated with me. And just knew that if I wanted to get a double degree done as large as that one in 5 years, that I didn't have a choice. So it was a matter of being very structured, very focused, and very strategic in how I put it all together. But then, as we said, the sleep side of things wasn't always great, and that suffered a little bit. And I think you can probably bounce back a little bit better when you're a little bit younger. So I didn't suffer too much from that, but yeah, I think it was really just that focus. But it was also a huge amount of sacrifice from my end. I mean, when you're 18, 19, you're in that point where you've got friends who might be doing the same degree, or possibly one that wasn't as involved, and then certainly most of my friends didn't play the sport that I played. So I would see them out and having a good time and having free time, but that wasn't the case for me. And it was something that I looked at and thought, well, I need to weigh all this up, but the drive to succeed from the education and the sporting world really overtook anything like that. And I think too, I had to work as well. I was working, for those who might know, a place called Jamboree Recreation Park, which is not too far from Kiama. It was a small sort of fun park, and I worked on weekends around my training too. So I think just trying to get everything in. It was tricky, but it's structure, it's sacrifice, motivation. I think they're the biggest things.
Yeah, and the structure is certainly a key in that, and then working out the structure and then sticking to it, because it doesn't sound like there's a spare second in that lifestyle you've just described. From the moment you woke up until the time you hit the pillow, which there's not much downtime in that. That wouldn't have allowed much social free time. So while your peers and colleagues are out partying and having fun, there would have been no room for that in anything you were doing, either study wise or sport wise. So did you feel like you were missing out at the time, or was it like, well, these guys are wasting their time. I'm on a mission here. I don't care what they're doing. I know where I'm heading. Look out. Is that what was your thinking and feeling at the time?
Yeah, I think there was a little bit of the missing out side of things. I mean, I'm a very social person, so I loved my friends and was keen to spend some time with them. But it was always beaten, I guess, by the feeling of, well, if I weigh all this up, I think I'm still going to go down the path of the sport and the making sure that I can do the study as well. So a little bit of missing out, but I think more of just don't let anything else get in my way. This is where I want to go, and I've got a laser focus on trying to get there.
Yep. And tell me if you can think back this far. What was the end game in your head? The vision that you had in terms of sport and your life in the law. What was the vision of the life that and the goals and achievements that you had in your mind that this is what I'm going to do. Can you remember that back, and can you sort of put some shape around that for us?
Yeah, I think as a young person and being a very keen netballer, I used to watch the netball on television. I used to watch the Australian team, win 1-point world championships in the middle of the night. And that was always what I wanted to do. I wanted to be an Australian netballer. At the time, I knew that netballers, it's very different to today, and it's wonderful that netballers get paid today and they can totally focus on it. But back then, netballers didn't get paid. So it was knowing that I wanted to get there, but also knowing that I needed to have a career, because being paid as a netballer was not an option. And I think a lot of the people I played with were in exactly the same boat. So I think almost every netballer I played with throughout my career was at university studying or doing an apprenticeship or at TAFE. Everybody knew that you needed something outside that, and to be able to juggle that was sometimes tricky. If you had to travel interstate to play the big games, then you would have to take time off work. But I think if I look back, and what I looked forward to when I was younger was absolutely, the goal was be an Australian netballer, be a successful lawyer, and try and make sure that those two work together.
Yeah. And your goals in the law, I mean, you say being a successful lawyer. What did that mean to you? What did that look like?
Yeah, I think for me it was about making sure I got into a really good firm, onto a graduate program, then I could work my way through. Back then, sort of articled clerks were around, and summer clerkships were around, and that was a way to get a foot in the door. I had a real love for intellectual property law, which is a bit probably unusual for some people. It's quite a niche area. But I had a real love for some of the subjects that I did. Labour law too. I was sort of, I guess that's the fairness aspect coming out in me too, around the labour law. But
yeah.
I always thought that I would be the person who would fight for the common good. That was why I did law. I wasn't someone who was too distracted by sort of the television shows and what standing up in a courtroom and arguing and that sort of thing. For me, it was all around doing good and seeing justice prevail. And I think that's what I really wanted to get out of it.
Yeah, awesome. It's a big baton to carry in the sense that, particularly in the current world where we see the lack of fairness trickle down right from the very top, particularly at the political level. It must have eaten at you at times and frustrated you. How did you deal with someone who has those perfectionist tendencies, who likes to be liked and is very, very social? There's a lot of conflict involved in the law. How did you come to grips with that conflict? Because I would imagine that would have been quite challenging.
Yeah, it was, Bushy. And I think when I reflect on it, as I said, I really wanted to get into intellectual property law, but I didn't ultimately have an option for that. I think when you're a graduate in Sydney in the early 2000s, your options were pretty limited. And I got into a firm. It was a good firm, mid-tier firm in Sydney, but I got into commercial litigation. That was where I landed. And coming back to the sort of the fairness side of things, I was working in secured and unsecured litigation, and I was the person who drafted letters of demand and issued statements of claim and issued bankruptcy notices and would go to court and make sure that people were bankrupted on behalf of my big clients, my big commercial clients. And that to me was very, very hard. It was a difficult position to be in. And after 3 years of doing that, I pulled the pin and I said, I can't do this anymore. And I just can't, I can't be the partners that I work for. I can't see myself ever being in their shoes. And I left the profession behind.
Wow.
Yeah, it was an unbelievably big decision, and but something that was quite a quick decision in the end. I spoke to my husband about it and said, I can't conscionably continue doing what I'm doing. And although someone has to do that, and when people are in sort of financial situations and they do what they have to do, I understand the process, but I didn't want to be the person pulling the trigger.
Oh, I can't even imagine. You're the executioner, basically, and you would have seen firsthand the, rightly or wrongly, whether that person got themselves into that position and the choices they've made. There's still a horrific outcome to that, and you're sitting there in that very emotional situation. Would have been with someone with your approach to life, would have been soul destroying, I would have thought at times. Yeah,
absolutely was.
Yeah, interesting. Well, let's look back to because you achieved fantastic things in the netball arena, and I'll talk in the post-recorded intro to give more details of that. But there was clearly there was a transition at some point there from netball then into rowing. Talk us around what happened then and what ended the netball exercise for you, and then how did rowing emerge?
Yeah, well, I was at the AIS and I suffered a significant injury during a game. I blew out one of my ankles and tore all 3 ligaments and tore them off the bone in my ankle, and had a couple of reconstructions and was told, look, we're not too sure how it's going to recover. You may or may not play netball again, but certainly have a year off and see how you go. So I left Canberra and moved to Sydney with my partner at the time, who happened to be a rower that I met in Canberra. So he had retired, and he and I relocated to Sydney. And he was from Melbourne, so he hadn't lived in Sydney before. Yeah. And we were there for a few months and living in one of the southern suburbs in Sydney. And I was studying, I was working, but I hadn't played netball for probably close to 6 or 7 months, and was a little bit getting itchy feet, I guess, because I wasn't probably as busy as I normally am, but didn't have, just it was missing. I had a big part of my life that was taken from me. And he came home one day, walked in the door, and said to me, and introduced me to a rowing coach who happened to live next door. So the way that worked was, my partner at the time, he'd never lived in Sydney, didn't know of this coach, but this coach happened to be an Australian coach when he was on the Australian team, and it just happened to live in the apartment block next door.
Good grief.
And he came in, and I met him, and he said hi, and I said hi, and that was it.
Serendipity.
And about 2 weeks later, I thought to myself, hang on a minute, the rowing shed's only just down the road. Surely I could learn how to row, and that maybe could be something that I could take up to replace rowing. Netball. At the time, there was no inclination from me at the time that it would lead to where it led. But I thought, why don't I just give it a go?
Are you one of these people who, again, I'm seeing some similarities, who sort of casually falls into something, and then as soon as you start to focus on it, all of a sudden it goes from a casual interest to, no, I'm going to be the best.
Yeah.
Is that the journey? Because correct me if I'm wrong here, but you went from a standing start with just a general interest in rowing in 2004 to being on the Australian rowing team in 2007. From a standing start, 3 years, and you're in the Aussie team.
That's right.
That's incredible.
That's how it went. Yes. I mean, I think as being someone I was in my 20s by the time I started rowing. And what's a really interesting little story, I'll just tell that while I tell this, sort of explain the journey. But in 2004, I started, and then by the summer of probably early 2004, and then by the summer of 2004, which is when all of the rowing camps happened, I got invited to a rowing camp down in Jindabyne, and I went, and it was with a lot of people who were Olympians, but funnily enough, I knew a lot of these rowers because I was a netballer when they lived at the AIS. So 2 or 3 years later, I came across them again, and obviously we knew one another, and my partner had been a rower. So I'd spent a bit of time with the rowers, and they said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Good question. I'm actually not quite sure, because I think it was, they said, don't you play netball?" I said, "Well, I did, and I row now, but good question." So I think yes, from a standing start, I jumped in a boat, which was a big thong of a thing. It looked like a thong, just a huge thong, and the coach at the time, who I said had been an Australian coach, so I guess he had an eye for athletes. But it took me a while to even get to a point where I would sit in a boat on my own because I was petrified of falling in. I never forget the day.
You're still recovering from the ankle exercise too, I'm imagining, because
yes.
I mean that was pretty much a career-ending exercise from the netball front. And the one thing I do know about rowing is that it works absolutely every joint and every muscle, and it takes everything in your body to make that happen. So that would have been interesting in itself, I would have thought.
It was, yeah. And I think with rowing, just the movement of your feet in a rowing boat, you've got to be able to be quite flexible. So I had to, work through all that because you crouch right up when you take a rowing stroke. So it was something that I was working through. But yeah, I think, it took me a while to get in a boat. He was really understanding, but I never forget the day that I got in a single for the very first time, and the water was about knee deep. And then I sat in it. It's very, very unstable. And I had my oars, and he said, "Take a stroke." And I said, "No way." He said, no, you'll be fine. You won't fall in, take a stroke. I said, no way. And I floated underneath a pier and he came around, he said, "Just get out." So I jumped out. I jumped out. Literally, it was knee deep, and I walked the boat back to the shore. But that was my sort of introduction to rowing. But then obviously got the confidence to jump in a boat, and then he obviously saw that I had a bit of a flair for it, I think, and more because of, I think, my physical shape more than anything else. I was tall, I was long, and I'd spent years as an elite athlete in a different sport. So I think he thought, well, maybe we could do something here, and that's sort of how it all started. And then, unfortunately, he left the sport. He decided that he had enough, and so said to me, "You need to move clubs." So I ended up I moved my whole life from the southern suburbs up to the northern suburbs of Sydney, up to Mossman, and joined Mossman Rowing Club, where I met my coach. His name was Nick, and he was a 4-time Olympic coach at that point, and happened to be the head coach of the Mossman Rowing Club.
Wow.
And that was in, I think, 2006 that I moved to Mossman.
Yeah.
And then I made my first team in 2007.
Just incredible. I mean, meteoric, really, in relation to, because you would have been up against rowers that had been doing it since their high school days, and really working hard at it. And I'd love you to share, just so people understand just how challenging rowing is, because it's, having done a little bit of research on this, it's one of the most demanding Olympic sports. If you look at it across the board, there are very few sports that exceed the combination of physicality, the cardio requirements there, and then the mental challenge that goes along with that, to train so hard for such a very short sprint of a race. Can you just share with us a little bit of the challenges around that sport, and just how hard it is, both just to do it, yet alone succeed in it?
Absolutely, yeah. I think it was an interesting transition for me, being a netballer. In netball, obviously you need a team. You can't do it on your own. So transitioning from being a netballer in a very big team environment to being a rower, and rowing is really interesting because you've got teams of rowers, because as if those who've watched rowing understand that you can be in a single or a double or a quad or an 8, and you can have up to 8 people in a crew. But to get to that point, you need to be fast on your own. And so it's a 2K race, but to be able to be fast over a 2K period of time, which is around about 8 minutes for someone who's on their own, and then the time decreases the more people you have in the boat. So we're looking at probably a maximum of 8 minutes. And when you think about 8 minutes, it's not very long. But 8 minutes it's 2 kilometres. It's at your anaerobic threshold for 8 minutes, and that's a very long time to have a heart rate of over 200 consistently for 8 minutes. And I'll never forget, training, I'd hit 210, 215 for training sessions, heart rate, and we took we collected all that sort of data. But to get to the point where you could row 2Ks in a very quick time to be competitive, you're doing 6 or 7 20-kilometre sessions a week on the water. You're doing 15-kilometre sessions on the rowing machine. You're doing weights 3 or 4 times a week. Saturdays would always be 2 rows, a big row and then a shorter row, so maybe a 20K row, then off for breakfast, a 10K row, off for lunch, and then a 50-kilometre cycle. So we'd go out to West Head or Akuna Bay in Sydney, out to Palm Beach, and our coach would follow us and we would be on our bikes. And all of that to race for 8 minutes.
So there had to be a lot of enjoyment of the process, not just the race, but the process that you got some satisfaction out of, the having to push yourself that hard. Do you get satisfaction out of just going, right, I'm going to push myself as hard as I possibly can, and that's what gives you your jollies? What is it that's driving you at that point?
Oh, absolutely. It's what is the threshold? What is the threshold, and how far can I push to get there, and then how far further can I push to get through it? And I think for those who might have ever rowed, a 2K race is painful. It's you get to a point in that race where you think, oh God, I really like to stop. Every single race, regardless of how high your level is, every single race you get to the point where this is really hurting me. But to get to that point, you have to go through the process of doing training sessions that really push you to the absolute limit. But I've always been someone who's always wanted to push my body to its absolute limit, whether it's fatigue, whether it's heart rate, whatever it might be, is that I want to make sure that I'm the best that I can be. And I know when I stop, I know that I could not have done anything else. That's the feeling that I have always searched for in the process of the training. And I loved the training. I loved it just as much as racing. I loved, getting down to the shed at 5 o'clock in the morning. It's pitch black, getting my boat ready, getting on the water, putting lights on. The whole the routine and the ritual of doing that for me was fabulous. And the people, I think the people involved, the squad that I was in Sydney for years, just some of the most wonderful people that became my second family. My coach certainly, became a second father to me, and I enjoyed the training just as much, and I would always want to see what could be next. If I was doing a time trial, a 5K time trial, how fast did I go? How fast can I go next week? What was the tide doing? What's the wind doing? Sort of knowing all the factors to think about and to weigh in. But ultimately it was that feeling of sort of sheer exhaustion, I think, that I was sort of always searching for, and knowing that I really pushed to the very, very end.
It's giving all is what I'm hearing there. Tell me about the times during that short 8 minutes for 2K race. There was probably a regular point where you hit that mental threshold where the most mere mortals would say that I'm done, I can't do anymore. What is it in your thinking that carries you past that point of no return, where it's like every part of your body would be burning, every breath would be like fire, I would imagine. How do you? What's your thinking? What's your process that carries you beyond that point?
Yeah, I think sort of when it comes down to it is someone has to win. And if I'm hurting as badly as I am, surely everybody's going to hurt just as much. And if I continue and go that little bit faster and push that little bit further, they're going to hurt even more. That might seem a little bit sadistic, but I always had that feeling. And I've got a 9-year-old daughter now who loves running, and I often talk to her about that. She's a quite competitive runner, and I say, particularly up hills, I say, Mem, if you go really fast up that hill and you push and push and push, trust me, everyone else is hurting too. But if you go a little bit quicker, you'll make sure that they hurt more. And so that was that concept for me was, yep, it hurts, but I'm going to get there. And if I get there quicker, then that's going to be obviously a great result for me. But it was absolutely pushing through those physical barriers, those lactic acid barriers where, all you want to do is stop and throw your feet in the water. And it was that real sense of, I need to do it because I need to achieve it. But if I can do it and achieve it and win, then that's going to be even better for me.
Yeah, love it. So, I mean, obviously that approach produced great rewards because you got yourself in the Australian rowing team in pretty short order by 2007. And I understand you were actually selected following an appeal. Talk to us around, it would have been pretty interesting. What was happening there?
It was interesting. I think as an older person who joined the sport, as you said, competing against people who've done it for 10 years, from junior athletes in high school and then going to junior world championships, that sort of thing. I think there was a little bit of you don't belong here that happened.
Yeah.
And despite the fact that I was performing and getting good results, there was still a little bit of you don't have the history behind you. This is all speculation, of course. From my perspective. Yeah. But I think there was that little bit of I was an outsider, and I certainly got along really well with everybody. And I said I knew some of them, but I think more from the people looking at the crews and selecting who might make a boat go fast here but not there, and what sort of combinations to look at. Ultimately, I went through the Australian selection in 2007 and I was not selected. And the results that I had throughout the season, but also when you go to a selection trial, normally it's 10 days. You normally race once or twice a day, and what they do is they call seat racing, where they'll put me in a certain seat, then they'll take me out and put somebody else in and see if the boat goes faster. And they do this and they rotate people through different seats, because even if you think, 4 people in a boat, it can be very different between who sits at the front, who sits at the back, and obviously who sits in the middle. So it's very, very technical. And I had produced results across that entire selection regatta that should have seen me in the team, but it didn't. And so at the time, a good friend of mine was a QC who was a member at Rothman Rowing Club, and I contacted him and I said, we need to appeal. And he said, yep, no problem. So we put an appeal in, and it didn't get to the point where it went to a tribunal or to arbitration. The decision was made sort of behind closed doors that they would put me into the team. So
was a bit of politics creeping in here in terms of that, the relationship side getting in the way right of the performance exercise, and then you calling that out and saying, hold on, this isn't about who you like, this is about who's best. It was that sense of fairness bubbling to the surface again, saying, hold on, I am the best person to be on here. It's not about who you know and how long you've known them. Was that your thinking at the time?
It was. I mean, I put in lots of hard work, but again, the fairness side of things, I couldn't see how it wasn't as subjective. From my perspective, it was nowhere near as subjective as what I think they were making it out. I think it always is a bit tricky with boat seat racing because you've got conditions that might affect it. You've got wind that might come up that wasn't there half an hour ago. So there are certain things, and it can be tricky. And I certainly don't envy selectors, and I sit on a selection panel in Canberra, and it can get very tricky. But when it is as black and white as it was, for me there was no grey in that process. And so when it was announced, and I said, well, it wasn't even a second thought. It was no, this is wrong, and I need to right this wrong.
Yep. You won the appeal clearly to get into the team, and the move to Adelaide. What drove the move to Adelaide? Was that because of the alienation that resulted from that exercise?
No, not at all. No. So the team, what was interesting was they selected, I was a sculler, which means you have 2 oars. Every person has 2 oars, and they selected a double and a quad, so a 2 and a 4-person boat. And when they decided to put me in the team, instead of switching somebody out from one of those boats, they selected me to row the single for Australia, which they hadn't selected because historically Australia hadn't done all that well in single racing. We did better in bigger boats, so 2 or 4 or 8 people. So what they did was they put me in the single and said, well, you can go and race the single at World Champs, which they hadn't done in a long time. And you can essentially be sort of the reserve for the other boats, because what they do in rowing is they prioritise boats. So they say, okay, if we think that the quad is going to have the best chance to get a medal based on all the other crews in the world, so we are going to prioritise the quad, and we're going to put our best 4 rowers who row together, which might not be the top 4 in the country, could be the person who's 2nd, 5th, 10th and 7th, but they row the best together. We're going to prioritise that boat and put them in. So they had a double and a quad, and then I was the single. So I got to race the single at World Champs, but I would also be there if one of those squad members couldn't race. But the move to Adelaide was because the coach appointed to the female scullers, heavyweight women scullers crew, lived in Adelaide. So they moved the whole squad to Adelaide. And we trained down there for about 3 or 4 months. Which is interesting though, because I was doing my postgraduate degree in law, and at the time, so I had to fly back. So I had to fly back to Wollongong a couple of times when I was in Adelaide to sit exams, because they wouldn't let me sit them in Adelaide, which was a little bit frustrating. But yeah, so the move to Adelaide was because of the coach, and that often happened. You'd have crews that would all relocate to Perth or to Tasmania or to Adelaide because that's where the coach was based.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Did it feel like the racing this single scull, based on what I'm hearing there, if they hadn't raced the single scull for quite some time, it's almost like we'll give you a position, but we'll give you a position that's not the serious position because we've already decided who the 4 are. Did you feel that? Did you feel that at the time? Yeah,
I did, but I also thought, well, I'm in, and it gives me good opportunity and a launching pad for next year. Beijing's next year, and I thought I'll take that. I think I wasn't going to be too fussy in trying to then fight for a position within one of the crews. I was very comfortable in the single. I really liked rowing the single.
Yeah.
And I think also when you're in a single, you only rely on yourself, and this is probably where this sort of innate sense of I guess of pushing myself every step of the way was that it was only ever me. And so if I didn't do something well, it was always me. And I could focus on that and fix that. And and I think too, there was actually one day or a couple of days we were training up at Murray Bridge, which you might know, Bushy.
I do. I know it well. Yeah. On the Murray there.
On the Murray, yeah. We went up there, and I was a rower who always suffered from really bad hands. Okay. I always got like blood infections in my hands, and always sort of that friction on the rowing oars. If you should Google, rowing hands, and you'll find what I'm talking about.
My imagery is not real pleasant right now, so I may not do that actually.
No, but there was a particular situation one day at Murray Bridge where my hands were so bad that I couldn't hold on to my oars.
Wow.
And I couldn't use another fork. I couldn't feed myself. So I thought, okay, well, it's only me, so I could definitely not train. But if I did train, it's going to be painful, and I'm going to want to take my hands off the oars. So what should I do? So I taped my wrists to my oars. Yeah. So I said to one of my team members, one of my best mates, I said, "Can you just get some strapping tape and just tape my wrist to the oars?" And she said, "Why on earth would I do that?" I said, "Well, if you don't, I'm going to let go, and I don't want to do that. So if you tape my oars to my hands, then I'll be forced to train." And she's like, "You're insane," but did it anyway. So I think I think it's again, and being in the single, I could sort of do that. I didn't have to impact anybody else. So in the end, I had a really good time racing the single that year.
Well, you got in the world champs, and you end up being placed 13th in the world, which is just absolutely incredible. But I understand there was a major shoulder injury that happened around that time. Talk us through what happened, and I'd love you to share your thinking then, because it would have been a devastating blow at that time. Talk us through the circumstances around that.
It was absolutely devastating. So when I was in Adelaide, my left shoulder was giving me a little bit of grief, and I finally went and saw a sports doctor about it, and he told me that I had a stress fracture across the back of my shoulder blade. And he said, "Do you play rugby?" He said, "Do you play AFL?" And I said, "No." And I said, "Why do you ask?" And he said, "Well, that's an injury AFL players get because they, with all the jumping in AFL, they often, might get a foot in the back and they crack their shoulder blade." I said, "No, I'm a rower." Wow. And so sort of long story short, that was just at the time where we were transitioning back to Sydney because we were flying out. We were going across to Henley, the Henley Royal Regatta in London, and then from Henley over to Switzerland to train in the Swiss Alps. To do altitude training, and then we were heading down to Italy, which is where the base camp for Rowing Australia is, in Varese, northern Italy, then before going to Munich for World Champs. So that was the process. So we made our way home from Adelaide back to Sydney, and the team left without me. I wasn't medically cleared to go. So, in the end, I think looking back on the single, it was probably a good thing because it would have affected the team had I been in a crew boat. But I was told to down all tools in terms of rowing, and that a stress fracture requires 6 weeks of rest. So I went back to Moss Rowing Club and got on a very old spin bike and put a television in front of the spin bike and spent 6 hours a day for 6 weeks on a spin bike. I couldn't do anything else. And that was certainly, spending 6 hours a day on a spin bike is not a hell of a lot of fun. But I knew they were racing over in Henley, and it was a really big blow. But I did my rehab and did everything I had to do, and they finally cleared me to head over. But I missed Henley, so I've never raced at Henley, which is a shame, and maybe something I'll do on my bucket list. But I ended up meeting up with them, with the team in the Swiss Alps up in a place called St. Moritz in the Alps, and started my training there, and then sort of joined them, and then went to Italy and Germany from there.
Just for those who don't know, the altitude training is a very important part of preparation, given that with the lower oxygen levels of that higher altitudes, it forces you from an aerobic perspective to have to work a lot harder, so that when you get back down on the track, it's easier. Must be very challenging conditions, Zoe.
Yeah, it is, and a lot of sports do altitude training, and it is challenging, but something that everyone sees a net benefit to. So you just sort of have to get on with the job. And where we were training, funnily enough, it was a very famous lake for kite surfing.
Okay.
And we thought, well, hang on, if it's famous for kite surfing, then it's got to be windy, and really windy. And really windy and rowing does not mix. So it was. I had an interesting experience there one day where I was in the single, and the wind was terrible, and I was getting waves crashing onto the boat, and I nearly sank. I managed to get to just close enough to shore where I could jump out and stand up, and then pull the boat in. But freezing cold water in the Swiss Alps, even in summertime. But the training up there was intense, and you could really feel it, doing things like things like chin-ups or even weights in the gym that you might at sea level be completely fine with. Just so much more taxing on your body at altitude.
Incredible. But you managed to get through that, and you got into the Australian Olympic rowing team in 2008, and you actually then did shift across into the quad sculls. Mm-hmm. And again, there was a bit of an injury exercise there. Talk us through what was happening.
Oh, yes. Yeah, so there were 2 Olympic selection regattas. The first one was in February, and that all went really well. And then the second one was in April. And I was in the gym doing a normal session about a week out from the final Olympic selection regatta, and I did a squat jump and tore my rectus abdominis, so one of the muscles in your groin connected to your abdominals, and I went straight upstairs. I was at a N-Swiss, and so I went straight upstairs to the physio, and they laid me down, and they said, "Can you sit up?" And I couldn't do a sit up. Wow. And they said, "Oh, you've torn your rectus abdominis." And then they told me that a very famous Australian athletics sprinter had done that, I think 4 or 8 years before that, and he was out for 8 weeks. And I said, well, you've got 7 days, so whatever you have to do, just do it. So in those 7 days, I couldn't walk very well. And I was sort of having as much treatment as I could have, cortisone injections, that type of thing, but did get to the final selection regatta unable to row. They wouldn't clear me to compete. So for the first 2 days, I sat on the side of the Sydney Olympic rowing regatta course on a spin bike again, just cycling over, watching everybody race, and just being sort of mortified that I wasn't out there. By the third day, they cleared me to race a single scull for about 1,250 metres. They said, "Yep, you can get in." And they taped me with strapping tape. I had strapping tape from my covered my entire belly area, so from my groin sort of all the way up. Yeah. And just to try to hold everything together. And that was successful. So by the fourth day, they said, "You can jump in a boat." And then by the 6th day, I think I'd raced twice, and then by the 6th day it was all over. And I thought, oh dear, this is either very, very bad, or I've performed well enough. And I had the boats that I went in went quite quick, so that was fine. But I just hadn't had many races. But I had the Olympic regatta, qualification regatta 2 months before that as well, that had gone very well. So I think that was sort of in my favour. And then did 2 or 3 races, and then they called it off. And I remember sitting. There was the evening they announced the Olympic team, and I was sitting upstairs. And for those who might have seen the rowing course in Penrith, there's a finishing tower. It's quite tall, and I was sitting in the tallest room in the finishing tower, overlooking the course. And it's about 7:30 at night, and the whole squad was there, and we were just waiting to be told you're in or you're out. And I'll never forget that moment, because it was one of the most stressful moments of my life. And when you hear your name announced, it's a big relief, and you feel like, okay, I've done it, and now it's sort of onto the next phase of training. And what do we now? It's sort of this switch in focus of, okay, now we're there. We've got to get this crew in. We need to make sure that the crew trains really well, gels really well, and away we go. And that's how it happened.
It's really interesting that you use the word relief when it was announced. It's not. There is, I'm sure, there's some joy in there as well. But your word was relief, and what that's telling me is that the enormous physical, emotional, mental stress and pressure of getting to that point where you're even in consideration. To then say, "Yep, you're in," and it's like, whew, I'm in. And now,
thank goodness.
And then there's about 1 second of breath before, right now I'm focusing on making it happen.
Yeah, that's right.
Just talks to the level of intense stress and pressure that you must be under, and also the amount of stress and pressure you put yourself under, because you're so focused on that end goal of getting into the Olympics and potentially winning a medal, that there's a lot of self-pressure in that as well. Am I right in saying that?
Absolutely. Oh, it's huge, and I think for me, it's the number one. I think that intrinsic motivation and the absolute desire to succeed and be the best that I can be. It all comes from within, and it is stressful. And I think when you live in that bubble, you go with the flow. You understand it. You know what's happening. But then, when you do take a step back in those moments where you can take a breath and you realise the magnitude of it and how much you'd actually been, and probably more than you were ever aware of it, how much you'd been anticipating and, waiting and hoping for that to happen. It certainly was a relief. But the process to get there is probably more enormous than you realise as an athlete. And once you do have a chance to reflect, you realise the significance of it.
No, absolutely incredible. How does that translate into other areas of your life then? Because you put intense expectation and pressure on yourself to achieve, to be 100%. There's no room for 99%. It's got to be 100%. How does that then, if I look at, you're in a senior management role now in a company in Canberra, how does that then ripple out in terms of your expectations of others? Is it so that you're quite comfortable putting pressure on yourself, but you don't have the same expectation of those around you? How does that sort itself out?
Yeah, I think in business it's a little bit different. I certainly do put, in terms of myself, though, certainly do have those same expectations of myself. It's about, it's pushing the boundaries. It's achieving as much as I can. It's making sure that I've got a laser focus on the goals and where I'm going and where the business is going and what I need to do to make sure it gets there. And I think with others, it's really about, I think leadership's really about taking people on the journey with you. And really inspiring them and showing them why it's important and having these collective goals that resonate with them, and then they strive to also achieve the same thing. So I think I certainly have expectations across the business, but I think they're not unrealistic expectations, because those who are playing and performing those roles buy into the same culture and the same goals. So I think there's a real there's a big mutual benefit there from a business perspective.
Yeah, okay. So because when you come in with that operating system of perfection's the minimum result, not the ultimate outcome. And you're exhibiting that approach to yourself. When there are others in the team that aren't pursuing it with the same vigor, does that create stress and concern for you?
Yeah, it can. I think it's certainly something that I'm very sort of focused on the fact that my expectations for myself. Sometimes it might be unrealistic to put those on to others, and that sort of level of achievement is something that I think, as I said, they share. But in saying that, I think that it can be a little bit sort of frustrating when I might not be able to sort of motivate them as much as I would like to be able to sort of to get a point across, or to say, share sort of this vision. But I think that's rare. I think that the people, we're very selective with who sort of comes into the business because we are on a certain trajectory. So I think it's rare that I would have to sort of experience too much frustration around it, because those who are on that train are on there for the right reasons.
Yeah, so you've attracted the right people to support that vision, and those that don't have probably been managed out anyway, have they? If I'm reading that correctly.
Yeah, look, I think we've been really lucky. Our business has grown over exponentially over the last few years, and we've probably only, if we reflect on it, have a handful of people that might have sort of left us to do other things that we would otherwise have wanted to stay. So I think if you can in any business, I think you can certainly see if there isn't quite the right fit for the business and for others, and that's okay too. I think that sometimes you try things and it doesn't quite work, and we might realise that, and an individual might realise that, and then we we mutually go on separate journeys. But I think that's all part of running a business and making sure that you do bring the right people in and you're developing the right culture for the people within the business.
Yeah, love it. Yeah, I know that you're about to be named the firm's first CEO, and you're actually a finalist in the Executive of the Year 2021 Women in Law Awards. Again, massive, outstanding achievements in what is pretty much still, unfortunately, a male-dominated arena. How have you navigated that pathway in the context of all of that?
Yeah, look, I think what's been really interesting for me from a career perspective is, as I mentioned earlier, I stepped away from the law, and I stepped away from the law for quite a long time. Once I left that firm in Sydney, I got into a completely different industry. I worked for a leisure management company that ran aquatic facilities and golf courses and swim schools and gyms, and that I was a general manager there for 7 years when I lived in Sydney. And then when I moved to Canberra, I had this inclination that I wanted to go back to the law, but not to practice. I think having had 7 years of GM experience, I always loved the law, and I still do. But I thought maybe, just maybe, I could do something on the management sort of leadership side of law, and that's the path that led me to the company I'm with now. And I've been with the company for 4 years, and sort of went in when it was really small. We didn't have an office. We worked out of one of the owners has a farm out past Stromlo in Canberra, and we worked out there for a little while, and then we grew to the point where we finally took up office space in Canberra, and over the last 4 years, I think I joined 4 years ago, and we had between 20 and 30 people, I think, and we now have 120.
Wow.
So the growth has been exponential. And so I joined the leadership team with the 2 directors and another colleague, and there were the 4 of us who sort of led the business for quite a long time, and now it's obviously grown. So we've had to build out that sort of governance structure with the business, and for me, moving from more like a GM role across everything in the business to a more focused role for the last 3 years as the Chief Operating Officer for the business. Yeah. Really focused on driving the internal engine of the business, and yeah, I've been I really love what I do, and the people I work with are fabulous, and I've always expressed a desire to continue to learn and to continue to push my career forward. And yeah, I'm in the fortunate position now where Proximity is at a point where it's big enough to appoint a CEO, and that's what will be happening in the next couple of months. And there'll actually be 2 of us appointed to a sort of a co-CEO role to make sure that we're across all elements of the business as it continues to grow. And there's a really, really big growth trajectory for the business, and new business plan this year, and we're looking at how we push ourselves to the next level.
Yeah, and that push word again, I think that would probably be your favourite word, I reckon, Zoe. Push. Tell me, in the context of that, again, given the level of dedication you give to everything you do, that's potentially becomes life consuming. How have you managed to balance? Getting married, you've got 2 great kids. How have you managed that exercise? And given what you're about to go into, that pressure is only going to increase potentially. How have you and how will you continue to measure that so that you keep everything in check?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, Bushy, because I think you're right. I mean, this I work fairly long hours as it is, and something like this could possibly push that in a that could be that trajectory could keep going up. And so it's really important to have a really keen focus on making sure that doesn't happen. And I know I'm very fortunate that the 2 men who own the business I work for, they're also in a similar position in life. They've got children, and they know that work isn't everything. So we've got a very keen focus on work-life balance in the business, but we also know that things need to get done. And I think for me, the biggest thing is the supportive environment that I have at home. I have a wonderful husband. As you said, I've got 2 great kids, and my husband has always been very supportive throughout my rowing. And then, although when I told him I was retiring from rowing, he couldn't have been happier. It's probably one of the happiest days of his life. So he said, I've been waiting for years for you to say that. But I think that supportive environment, I can't understate that. It's incredible. He is wonderful. He said fairly similar to what my dad, when I was much younger, said, I want to give you, the path to make sure you achieve everything that you want to achieve. And my husband's a bit the same. He understands that, I've got these career goals, but, I've also got family goals, and he's happy to sort of help and support me through that. He works full time. He's got a great job, and he's got a senior role in his business too. So it's us, juggling that. He has a little bit more flexibility. So he plays that really great role. But I think it's about making sure I'm organised and that I'm focused. And that I prioritise. I think that's the really, and that goes back to probably my days as an athlete. But it's really, I think when you are a busy mum and you're trying to do lots of different things, and as I said, I volunteer. I sit on the Paralympic rowing classification committee, and I do the Paralympic classification, and trying to fit all those things in and feel like I'm giving back, but I'm also giving my family enough time and giving my work enough focus. It's really tricky, and it's a real juggling act. But I think the prioritisation and organisation and focus are probably my really sort of big things. And I think too, understanding that there has to be balance, and always taking the time out to focus on health gives me a real sense of calm and clarity. My husband often tells people I have a mental illness because because of my sort of I wouldn't say it's an addiction to training, but I certainly make sure that I do that, and that gives me a little bit of space. It might be 45 minutes a day or something like that, an hour a day, but it's also time to focus on health and being really functional physically.
Yep.
Because I don't think any of us can get through the busy lifestyles we have without making sure that we look after ourselves, look after our bodies, what we do, what we eat, how much exercise we do. That's really important because that sets us up. And that's one thing I focus on as well.
Yeah, and being very similar, not to the level that you do, of course, but the physical exercise, it just comes a jets for me. In fact, I become a very itchy, scratchy, grumpy bastard if I don't exercise. So I'm a better person for myself, but I'm also a better person for others when I'm including that physical regimen in the routine.
Absolutely.
Yeah, love that.
Yep.
So if you sort of look back at your career to date, are there any regrets? And if you spoke to your school leaver self now, would you advise her to invest her time, energy and money any differently to what you've done?
Oh, look, I think regrets? No regrets. I think the path that's led me to where I am, I wouldn't change it. The injuries haven't been so much fun sometimes, ankles and, shoulder reconstructions and that sort of thing, certainly wouldn't change it. I could take those away, but apart from that, I wouldn't change it. I think if I sort of talk to my former self, I think that one of the things I would say would be to that investment's a long game.
Yeah.
And to start early, and that's in everything. That's education, financial, but invest early, and if you can, know what you're pitching for. And I think the other thing I think I would talk to my former self about is that if whatever you're doing, and if you are choosing a career where you're working for someone else rather than yourself, which many of us do, that make sure whoever you're working with or whoever you partner with or whoever you spend time with, that they invest in you as much as you invest in them. Because there are so often, I think, relationships can be one-sided. And I think we all need to be acutely aware of that, and really find the place where we can be happy, but really making sure that the investment is two ways.
Have you had some experience where it hasn't been two ways? Because, I mean, you're a 150% person as well, so whatever you're going to do, you're going to give to that level, and you give that dedication, you give that loyalty. I'm picking up from what you're saying there that perhaps that hasn't been reciprocated in certain instances. What's been the experience there?
Yeah, I think there have been instances that I've had professionally where loyalty, when you bring sort of loyalty into it, I'm a very loyal person. I'm very dedicated, but once I'm in, I'm in. And I think too, loyalty can be a little bit one-sided sometimes, and can almost be a poison chalice where people can take advantage even if they're not consciously doing it. And I think that we sort of need to be mindful of that. And I've reflected on situations in my life professionally where I've probably not noticed it at the time, and I've been in it. Others have sort of mentioned it to me, but I've sort of thought, no, it's okay. I'm okay. But when you reflect on something like that, you realise that perhaps you need to have the perspective of someone else, or to be able to take a step back sometimes and really assess and evaluate your position. And that's something that I, was able to do, and sort of remove myself from a situation that wasn't necessarily bad. Certainly I found it quite enjoyable, but you could start to see that it was far more one-sided, and I was giving a lot more than I was getting back.
Yeah, and there's a point where people start taking advantage of it, and they start expecting it, and then the gratitude's gone, and then you start to feel used in that situation rather than it's a tough challenge for someone like you in that regard. I'm going to switch into what I affectionately refer to as the ambush round now, Zoe, which are the fast five, or the bushfire lightning round, as I like to call it. That the listeners love to glean your words of wisdom on. So to kick that off, what's your favourite quote and why?
Oh, you'll love this one, Bushy. This quote is from Hunter S. Thompson. Now, he and I probably don't share a lot in common in terms of how he lived his life, but this is one of my favourites. So this one goes: "Life should not be a journey to the grave with the intention of arriving safely in a pretty and well-preserved body, but rather to skid in broadside in a cloud of smoke, thoroughly used up, totally worn out, and loudly proclaiming, 'Wow, what a ride.'" So I love it. I think that it reflects how I approach life. Certainly, I'm not a risk-averse person. I'm happy to take risks and go down the untrodden path, and I simply love that. I think it's a wonderful way to live your life.
Totally, I love that quote. It's one of my favourites actually. It's a cracker. And it's really about embracing life as a fantastic opportunity and making sure that we are squeezing absolutely everything out of it. And I'm sure that like me, you look at a lot of other people who are sometimes, in my opinion, wasting life is probably too strong a word, but it frustrates me. I've seen people through my journey have wonderful natural abilities that they're then they either ignore them, take them for granted, or don't do anything with it. And we're here such a short space of time that it astounds me sometimes that people aren't going, wow, let's really make the most of the journey while we're here. What's your thoughts around that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you do. You often see people who coast through life a little bit, and not really sort of pushing the boundaries, and I don't mean physically, just sort of pushing in a way that sort of takes them outside their comfort zone, I guess. And I think more of us should do that, because there is so much out there, and like you said, it's such a short space of time that we're here, and to really find out what it's all about and have those different experiences. And I think that's so important, because you impart wisdom to others, and if you've got children, you can bring them along the ride, or you can make sure that you sort of transfer those stories and you teach those lessons. And I think that more of us should be doing that.
Totally, 100%. All right, switching into the literary field for a minute then, what's the top book that you'd recommend we read and why, Zoe?
Yeah. Oh, Bushy, I don't read as much as I used to. As you would know, I read a lot of legal text for a very long time. But look, I think for me, reading for me is an escape. And I love the novel by Terry Hayes, who's an Australian writer, called I Am Pilgrim. It's a classic sort of thriller, I guess. I'm not sure if you've read that one, Bushy.
I haven't. It's going straight on the list. That's going into the Kindle as we speak. Awesome.
It's a big book. I think it's about 600 pages.
Nice.
But yeah, I Am Pilgrim by Terry Hayes. I think it's a great read. I mean, it's a classic sort of thriller, centers around a man's journey to uncover a serial killer's identity, and then he becomes entangled in this whole terrorist conspiracy, and I just can escape into those books. I really enjoy them, and my husband hates them. So he's like, oh, it's so that's never going to happen. And I said that's okay, because that is my time. It's my time to enjoy something that I otherwise wouldn't.
Love it. Now, this next one's a little bit left field, but there's still a lot of Australians who feel that they pay too much tax. So what's the top legal thing that you've done to minimise the tax that you pay, Zoe?
Yeah, I think, very recently, Bushy, as you know, we've purchased a property, an investment property, and we've structured the purchase of that property to ensure that a maximum refund for me, given that I'm sort of in a high tax bracket threshold. Yeah. We were very conscious of that. And we looked at our options and thought, okay, well, that's the best way to go. So that's how we've structured the purchase of that property.
Yeah, and it's for the listeners, that's using tenants in common provisions where we can slant the percentage of ownership to the higher income earner and therefore keep a lot more of your hard-earned money in your pocket, not the tax man. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, brilliantly done. Now, back on the investment topic for a minute then, what's both the worst and the best piece of investment advice that you've ever received today?
Well, certainly the worst advice was not to buy property back in 2012.
Who told you that?
I think it was a family member, and I won't drop them in, but said, oh, no, not a good investment. You should stay away from property in the sense of it being an investment rather than to live in.
Yeah.
So, that was probably one of the worst pieces of advice I've ever received.
The best?
But I think but the best I think is you need to make money when you sleep.
Yeah.
So find an investment opportunity that'll actually allow that to happen. And I think that's a really keen focus for me at the moment, for myself and my husband, is what can we acquire, what assets can we acquire that will do that for us, that we don't have to work extraordinarily hard to get them to increase in value and to work for us. So certainly making money while you sleep is a very good thing and a very good position to be in. And probably the other one I wanted to mention was that understanding that debt is actually an asset. And I know you probably know a lot more about this than I do, Bushy, but that it's a really positive thing, and it really allows the use of leverage to build equity, and then you can move equity from one asset to another as property appreciates, and we go down that path. So I think in terms of the two best pieces of advice, they're probably the two best ones that I've ever heard.
Yeah, love it, and they're spot on, and they're those that, unfortunately, a lot of hardworking Australians don't learn until too late in life. So you're certainly onto that early, which is awesome. Okay, final question in the series then. What's a personal habit that you believe has contributed most to your success? I won't say investment success, but to success generally over your journey so far.
Yeah. There's probably a few of them. I think I'm a super pragmatic person. I don't sort of get too emotionally attached to anything investment related. So just looking at the investment side of things. And I can stay quite rational with it. So I find that that's been really helpful when we've sort of been on this recent investment journey. I think also, being effective at my job allows and provides this disposable income that then I can invest back and, build wealth, hopefully to get to that point where we're financially free. So I think those two things around the actual investment. In terms of a personal habit around success, I think it's I do really think that it's being organised. I think that successful people are generally organised, and because they're organised, they can fit a lot in.
Yep.
And they feel like that they never get overwhelmed. So I think that's really a personal habit that I've maintained as long as I can remember, because I've always sort of, bitten off more than I can chew, and then then you chew like hell, sort of thing. But I think, I think being organised and structured is a really key part of my life.
Yeah, and I think if you look back, the proof's in the pie with your own life to date, Zoe, in that you have this innate ability clearly to focus on a massive goal, but then to do the work on a daily basis, incrementally, making the changes but constantly pushing yourself so that the success is almost inevitable because you treat it as a long game. You know that's going to take a lot of hard work. You're not scared by the hard work, but you break it down into daily bites. That means that what I'm doing today I know is going to get me to where that ultimate goal is. And there's very few people that have the discipline and commitment and determination to actually go the distance. So fully commend you on that. Final question then, and it's a big one that gives you an opportunity really to put a bow around the conversation that we've had today. If I gave you a microphone that spoke to every single one of the 7.7 billion people alive in the world today, and I gave you 60 seconds to talk, what sort of life-changing message would you give to them and why?
I think really it's around health, and take action today and do something for your future. Do something that your future self will thank you for. So, and I really do think it's around health. It's around getting good advice. It's around doing your own research in whatever you're doing with your life, doing due diligence, and taking risks. I think that's a big part of living life to the absolute fullest. So, be conscious of risk, and make sure that you leverage opportunities when they come your way.
Love it. Beautifully said, beautifully summed up. It's been an awesome conversation, Zoe. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your journey so far. I've always had a lot of respect for you, and it's only escalated in our conversation today. So I appreciate you taking some very precious time out of your extremely busy day to share that with us on Get Invested.
Oh, thanks, Bushy, and likewise. I know how busy you are, so it's been wonderful to chat.
Been awesome. We'll stay in touch and we'll talk soon. Thanks, Zoe.
Thanks, Bushy.
Bye. To get a summary of all this investment gold in the show notes, just email me on hello@khgroup.com.au. That's HELLO@khgroup.com.au. Or check us out at www.bushymartin.com.au/Get Invested. I look forward to joining you next week for another episode of the Get Invested podcast. So thanks for listening, and as always, dream as if you'll live forever and live as if you'll die